All right, so we're excited to have Larry Kamer with us today, sharing how to be prepared and use best communication practices during a crisis. Larry is the owner of Kamer Consulting Group and is a veteran communications and public affairs strategist, teacher, and an expert in the management of issues and crises. He works with boards, senior executives, PR departments, law firms in the management of investigations, litigation, mergers and acquisitions, land use issues, recalls, workplace misconduct, media exposés, and other controversies. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Larry.
Very good. Thank you so much, Danielle. And I'm going to share my screen here. Just be sure. Is that showing up for everybody? Okay, very good. All right, well, good morning from Kamer World headquarters here in Yountville. Samantha, nice to see you. It's been so long. It's been minutes. This is my second of 3 Zoom presentations today. So thanks for joining. Just a quick introduction. Our firm, as Danielle said, we are public affairs and PR and marketing consultants, and I've been doing this kind of work for about 40 years. The kind of work or the kind of clients we have, you get a sense of them here. We work for extremely large brands like General Motors and Home Depot, for small nonprofits, for educational institutions. What you see on the left are the kinds of things that we help clients with. We also have a fair number of local clients here in the Valley, including Cake Bread Sellers and Thomas Keller Restaurant Group and others. Also do some work for Napa County itself, assisting them in some of their communications issues. I also teach. I'm on the faculty at the University of San Francisco, where I teach a course in crisis management and a course in leadership communications in the graduate communications program there. I also teach at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, where I'm part of a program that helps information security officers deal with information security crises like malware, ransomware, and that, directed denial of service attacks and that sort of thing. So let's just start off by defining terms, and certainly if you have a question, feel free to jump in or hit the chat, and and we can make this more of a conversation. I have some ground to cover, but I always want to make sure I'm being clear, and if you disagree or if there's something we need to explain a little bit more, please jump in. So we define a crisis as an event or a series of events that involve your organization, that involve a certain number of risks. The risk of severe operational impact, like you can't do your business, of large financial losses, environmental damage or damage to your surrounding community, and reputational risk. I also think that key to defining a crisis is to define it as a moment of great peril, but also as a moment that demands decisions. And this is the part that's hard, and this is the part that requires planning, testing, and training, because a lot of people freak out in a crisis situation, and it's good to be able to revert to good training and good planning when the unthinkable begins to happen. I also show here the Chinese representation of the idea of crisis, which is a contraction of 2 concepts, danger and opportunity. And most of us, tend to see the danger in a crisis situation and tend to want to run, and run away. But as we'll see, these are also moments where leading organizations and organizations with the right set of values and ethics will look for opportunities to improve themselves and to better serve their stakeholders. Why do we focus in on crises, aside from the fact that some of us kind of geek out on this subject and have imperfect DNA that makes us want to run into burning buildings as opposed to what sensible people do and run away from them? I think all of us in one way or another are involved in or are familiar with the communications function. And communications, when it's done right, creates value. It creates value in an organization. If you're in a consumer product space, it's going to help you differentiate product or professional services from your competitors, and that's going to help you drive sales volume. If you are one of those organizations that depends on public trust to operate, and so many do, and in a separate talk, I talk about how trust has just withered away and what the lack of trust means, for organizations and the communication, certainly the communication function. But when you earn and preserve trust, this allows you an environment for sustained growth. If your local councils or state legislators or interest groups, if you have their trust, they're not going to get in your way when you want to expand or want to move into a new market. And good communication also removes barriers, improving reputation, removing the risk of litigation support or litigation, lawsuits, regulation. And as any CEO or CFO will tell you, those litigation expenses, those lobbying expenses, they hate them. They hate them. They come right off the bottom line. And so anything that you can do to lower operating costs, so much the better. But good communications programs helps you with all of those things. But a crisis, on the other hand, subtracts value. We pay attention to it not just because it's something that rivets our attention, but also because they literally subtract value from an organization. They cut your potential to grow. They cut your potential for sustainable return on capital. And if you have investors, whether you're a public company or a private company, your investors want to see a sustainable return on their investment. Obviously, it diverts management's focus from what they should be doing if they have to keep paying attention to labor problems or harassment problems or government investigations, right? That's a distraction. And overall, repeated crises actually changes the risk profile of your business. And any of you who are involved in the risk management or insurance side of things know that can be a very costly thing if your risk profile decides to get much worse. Remember, I said a second ago that crises are also full of opportunities. And if you look at it, there's a lot of ways where crises provide a window for leadership to step in. If you look at a crisis as a period of high threat and high uncertainty, leaders can step in and bring things back to normal. Leaders can fix or show that they're fixing things, take responsibility, delegate, show that somebody's in charge. Empathy, very important. Oftentimes in a crisis situation, and we'll talk about this in a minute, you'll hear from companies where there's an airline incident or a product recall, and the first thing that the company says is something like, well, your safety is our most important priority, which is kind of a joke, right? Because they've just proven that that's not true. If they've poisoned a lot of people with a contaminated product or had an airline incident, the most important thing that leaders can do is to show empathy, put yourself in the shoes of the people who are dealing with that crisis. And leaders also are the ones who can get to root causes and make sure that bad situations don't happen again, and commit organizations to that cause. I want to talk specifically about a certain kind of crisis, and that is involving cybersecurity and information security, because while this was once the worry of large companies, large financial institutions, it's something that all of us have to be concerned about now. The first is, if you're involved in the business of PII, personally identifiable information, just look at all of the things that organizations and companies are being asked to protect and asked to safeguard from the bad guys. Everything from information on student loans social media, health insurance, credit card information, and so on. All of this comes with customer expectation that when they share that information with you, that you are going to protect it. And I focus on this because we can look at the numbers and the impacts that that loss of control of PII, when PII goes in the wild, as they say, or in the wind. But look at this, the emotional impacts that it has on our customers and our constituents and our stakeholders. People who find out that their access has been, that there's been unauthorized access to their information. Look at the array of feelings that people report feeling. Not the kind of thing you want your customers and your stakeholders to be thinking about when they think about you. Angry, stressed, violated, right? Only 10% say that they're unbothered. So understanding the management of information security crises and the communications around that is really important, especially from the point of view of just pure human emotion. And as we'll see on this next slide, your reputation. Data breaches are one of the worst things that can happen to a company's reputation. In survey after survey, people say that a data breach causes lost trust, says they will defect from that organization. They'll go to social media to complain about it. They'll tell people about it. And many say they'll pay more for the reassurance that that information is going to be protected, even if that means going to a competitor. So just to touch on this for a second, understand that when we do good communications programs, it's not just to put an end to the crisis, it's to deal with some very real human emotions that have long-term effects. So what does a crisis plan look like? I take clients through 9 steps. And, oftentimes the prospect of writing a crisis plan, whether it's a general one or specific to, say, product recalls or plant security or that sort of thing, can feel like a very intimidating task, right? It can feel like you're being asked to kind of plan for every potential crisis that could ever come down the pike. And, the truth is most of us are not going to need to plan for being hit by a meteor, right? That's unlikely to happen. It would be bad if it happened, but there's probably a lot of other things that we should be thinking about first. And so just the point that I want to leave you with is the best, in my view, best practice comes from a crisis team that owns this crisis plan. The crisis plan is not something that should get farmed out to lawyers or insurance companies or consultants or PR people. The internal crisis team, even if it's a small team, has to know what's in that plan and basically own it. Then we look at risks, and the easiest way to start this process, I found, is to get a good cross-section of people together and look at those risks that would cause the greatest damage to your organization, both operational and reputational, and then look at the likelihood of those risks happening. And the ones that rise to the top of both, that's where you start your crisis planning. So if you feel like your employees in a retail location are facing, increased risk of crime, or there's certain things that could happen to them and they need a little more attention and protection. Yeah, there's probably 10 crises that you could be preparing for, but that's the indication that that's where you should start. Highest risk, highest likelihood. Make sure it's clear who does what. In a crisis, ultimately, somebody has to make the ultimate decision. Generally speaking, someone's going to be taking care of communication, someone's going to be taking care of operations, security, I realize that in smaller organizations, you don't have a huge bench of people to do this, but this is also the time where it might be helpful to look at external resources and how you supplant what you have and identify those resources ahead of time so that you're not scrambling, when the crisis is actually there. When you begin to look at your risks, you begin to identify things that you can start fixing right away. And I would encourage you to do that. You don't need a crisis plan, to, clean out flammable materials from a building, right? So are there some things that we can put out right now? Crisis plan is written, has to be a written document, whether that's printed and physical or whether that's in the cloud or on people's computers. My view is if it isn't written, it doesn't really exist. Now, that plan is not a how-to guide. You don't pull it out and use it like a script. You use it for things like, here's the protocols, and and that's a reminder of how we start, or here's key phone numbers or key people we need to reach out to, or here's how we notify our insurers or our lawyers and that sort of thing. Then we do the training and testing. That is so that these plans are second nature, and the more you train and test on them, the less scary the prospect of dealing with a serious interruption or a left field kind of situation is going to be. And then, I always say you want to put an expiration date, like a carton of milk, whether it's a year or some period of time, so that you are forcing yourself to go back and look at the adequacy of your plans. So those are the kind of the quick 9-step overview that I think is essential. What's also essential is training for broad media exposure, right? Oftentimes it's a crisis. It might not be a crisis were it not for the presence of social media, mainstream media, TV, somebody sticking a microphone in your face. So it's profitable, I think, for organizations to really understand how the media works, social and mainstream, doing the due diligence, understanding who's likely to cover you if you have a problem. Understand that, you want to be in the driver's seat and use media to get to the right audiences. Oftentimes they're going to come to you and be very demanding and very loud, but it's important to be thinking about which media help me get to the audiences that most need to hear from me in my organization in a crisis. Be very clear on message and very consistent on what you're saying. Here, repetition is probably a good thing, even though, it's going to sound pretty boring to say the same thing over and over and over again. I remember when I worked in politics in the early part of my career, we'd go out with these candidates and they were so, on message that you could watch the reporters in the audience like literally mouthing the words of the speech because they'd heard it so many times. But that's a good thing. We're not at a cocktail party and we're not here to entertain our friends. We're here to get a message across to people about what the incident is, what choices people have, what they can do to protect themselves, if there's public safety issues, if there's shelter in place, those sorts of things. We have to be clear and we have to be consistent. And the other thing is with social media, we're not going to be the only voices who claim authority in that situation. So you got to get your message honed, practiced, and repeated again and again and again. Dealing with media is, like swimming in shark-infested waters. There are tricks of the trade. There are traps that you have to recognize, but they can be mastered. I've worked with lots of people who are really good at this stuff. And you understand that reporters have a job to do. And our job is to help them do their job, but also to make sure they know what it is we want our audiences to hear. And then practice. So if you have had media training of any sort, it's good to come back to it and do refreshers. The media is changing, the landscape is changing, and unless you're naturally gifted at this stuff, practice is really what's going to help you when the media comes calling for, especially in a difficult story. I want to talk about United Airlines for a second. I actually got this letter. Or I didn't get this letter, but somebody gave this letter to me. I don't know if you can see it, but it says it was a sincere apology from United. It says, based on the events you described, we did not meet this goal. Your comments regarding specific event will be used for coaching and training our employees. To encourage you to fly with us as a tangible means of acknowledging your disappointment. Enclosed is a specific item. I mean, this is the actual letter that somebody got, right? Why am I so fond of talking about United Airlines? Well, all you have to do is look at this picture and you know exactly what happened and you know the company involved, right? This speaks volumes about the power of social media, the fact that all of us, are publishers, filmmakers, camera people, editors, journalists, and by dint of that phone in our back pocket, right? So if you watch the video of this poor doctor getting dragged off of this United flight in 2017, the picture will tell you everything. When I show this picture in presentations just all by itself, everybody knows what happened and everybody knows it was United Airlines. And here you see, some of the clever treatment on social media, we'll seat you, then we'll beat you, board as a doctor, leave as a patient. But it's, all laughs aside, United lost almost $700 million of market cap, 3% of their stock in the immediate hours after they had this crisis, and I would argue mishandled this crisis by saying 4 different things successively. Their CEO said 4 different messages before they finally got it right. Now, you could say people got to fly, people are going to fly United Airlines, they'll make that up. But any of you who have been involved in a company that is losing a lot of money or losing market share or stock value, you have no idea when that's going to come back. So it feels pretty terrible when investors and when customers start running the other way. I want to talk now about apologizing, because many people think that essential in the crisis management process is you got to get there and apologize for something. And here's my favorite example. Here's the former Secretary of State, John Kerry, gave a speech to a military audience. And he said, education, if you make the most of it, if you study hard, you do your homework, and you make an effort to be smart, well, you can do well. If you don't, you get stuck in Iraq. Okay? I mean, a really dumb thing to say, especially as the Secretary of State, especially as a veteran himself. But he said, so this is what Kerry said. But Kerry then went and did something that lots of people do, which is to say, well, here's what I actually meant to say. And then he says, I regret my words were misinterpreted, wrongly imply anything negative. I personally apologize, blah, blah, blah. My poorly stated joke was not about and was never intended to refer to any truth. Okay. The point of talking about this is, one, do not feel compelled to rush out with an apology when something goes wrong. I want you to think about apologies as very strategic kinds of communication. Not like when we are 5 years old and we break something and we'll apologize to mom to make her go away, right? The apology has got to be part of a crisis remediation strategy. So, look at the difference between an apology and a faux apology. I love this one on the right. If you can't read it, this is something that somebody left on somebody's windshield. It says, so I hit your car and someone is watching and I'm writing this, blah, blah, blah. Still watching. Yeah, they're gone. Sorry, dude. Here's some free soap. Right. So it looked to all the world like this person was leaving a note, right, with their contact information, and they weren't. So let's talk for a second about apologies and faux apologies and why I think most apologies that you hear, especially from big companies that mess up, aren't very good. Because for one thing, I don't think they're thoughtful and I don't think they're strategic. So what is an apology? Well, if you get right down to it, an apology is to help you remediate the effect of a mistake. It's help you manage bad news. It's to reduce liability, litigation, and threats. And ultimately, it's a business decision. Now, I know that sounds kind of cold and calculating, but these things have to factor. It's a high stakes piece of communication that a lot of people will fall into based on emotion or without really thinking or analyzing the situation. What I call a perfect apology is one where you really understand and show your audiences you understand exactly what happened and why it's so bad. You acknowledge that people have been, it's cost them money, or it's inconvenienced them, or it's hurt people, or it's done other kinds of damage. You take responsibility for the situation, which is a very different thing from accepting blame and fault. And I'm happy to get into that. But responsibility basically is something human beings can do until we get to the root cause of the problem and who ultimately ought to be paying the price. If you're in the supermarket and somebody brushes against a jar of tomatoes and splashes it all over the floor, the store is not going to wait to clean it up until it finds out who did it or whose fault it was, right? Responsibility means you clean it up first and then you figure out how you keep that from happening again. You recognize that you have a role in the event. You may not be at fault. It may not be, maybe one of a series of people involved, but there you are. You let your audiences know that you regret what happened. You ask for their forgiveness, or at least for their indulgence for you to fix the problem. You make a promise that you're going to do whatever you can to keep this bad situation from happening again. And I hate to say it, but in this day and age, it has to cost you something. It has to be seen by your audiences as costing you something. A pound of flesh, a donation to an affected, to a relevant nonprofit, settlement money back to people who have been hurt. Restitution is really important in the world of the perfect apology. So here's a good step-by-step, and I'll this is being recorded, so please feel free to to use this, and certainly feel free to call me if I can explain or walk you through any of these things. But step by step, when you screw up, when you're involved in a crisis, especially if it's your fault or you are ultimately responsible, remorse is important. Empathy is important. Taking responsibility, which does not mean using words like, I'm sorry if you felt bad, or I'm sorry if my words were misinterpreted. Apologies should stand on their own. No weasel words, no blame, no, you've been misinterpreted what I said, and of course that's what makes you feel bad. No, a clean, I apologize, I'm sorry. Amends, as I was saying a second ago, how can I make this up to you? You put trust in me to do certain things certain ways, and we haven't done that. How can I make that up to you? For some people, that's going to be a matter of money. For some people, they're going to, if you're an organization with a pretty good reputation and some reputational capital in the bank, they'll give you the benefit of the doubt and say, well, I want you to show me that you've learned from this and you're not going to do it again. But the next time I come into this restaurant, there's not going to be a worm in my cellar, right? But I am going to come back to the restaurant. And then make sure you commit to change. Make sure you understand that what happened is serious, that person thinks it's serious. It's not a joke. It's not to be laughed about. It's something that is a moment for you to show that you're committed to changing and improving. So just a couple of quick couple of quick thoughts, and then I have a final thought that I want to share with you after this. But crisis plan that's appropriate for your business. So, if you're a small winery, you can't just pull a template crisis plan off the shelf, that works for a big, that works for General Motors, right? But what I'm here to tell you is they are not difficult to write. And there is a way to do them that will make you feel like you've got a little more confidence in managing that inevitable next crisis. Practice, and that means practicing for crisis situations. As kids, we're all used to dealing with fire drills or earthquake drills or, unfortunately, shooting drills now. But there's a reason why we practice these things. It's so that we can revert to our training and not get tripped up on the obvious emotions that come along. Communicating is important, as I said very, very early. You may not have all the facts. You're going to be in a moment of lots of bad information or disinformation, but it's important to communicate that you're present, that you care, that you're doing something about it, even if you don't know why that particular product, that contaminated product, made its way to the market. And again, I want to just share with you my feeling that apologies are important, but they have to be strategic. They should not be knee-jerk. I think if you read the news or watch the news or consume the news as a smarter consumer of apologies, take a look and see whether or not those apologies are effective, whether they're sincere or whether people are just apologizing way too fast, hoping to make a bad situation go away. So I want to, just as a PS, I want to talk about one very specific crisis that is near and dear to me, and that is the crisis in local news. As many of you know, I'm part of a group that started Highway 29 Media. We're the company that took over the Yountville Sun and the Calistoga Tribune. It was important for us to save these local papers, but it's also an opportunity to just look at what's happening in our community and the crisis that is occurring around the country with local news. I have a column about this in the Sun and in the Tribune today. But as we look around, the news business was in terrible shape going into the pandemic, and then the pandemic happened, and we lost just an enormous number of newspapers in those 3 years. And if the current trends continue, about a third of the papers that exist right now are going to be gone by 2025. Why is that a crisis? I mean, it's obviously a crisis for journalists and the people who work there, but I want to stress it's a crisis for all of us, because when local news dies, oversight of businesses, coverage of issues, people's involvement in elections, they all go down. I mean, there's numbers to show this. This isn't speculation. And the void gets filled with slimy kind of faux news, paid content, or things like Nextdoor. God love Nextdoor, but it's not what I want to rely on for all of my news. So it's important that we have local papers, local journalism sources. If you read Paul Franson's Napa Life this week, a couple of times he comes back and talks about what's happening at the Napa Register, and what's setting up to be what's called in the trade a news desert, where you have a paper of record that is kind of in name only. There's so few resources that they're not really serving the community. All of this is to say it's really important that you support our local journalism. You can now subscribe to the Sun and support us online at yountvillesun.com or calistogatribune.com. And our goal is to not just keep these papers alive, but to see what we can do to best serve the needs of this community up and down the valley. So that's a crisis I'm asking you to to help out with and to support us. And if you have advertising dollars, I know my colleague Eden Humble, who runs our advertising, is on this call. She would appreciate it. Keep your ad dollars local and just come, follow our sites, follow the news, subscribe, please, and do what you can to avoid this news crisis that we're looking at here in the Napa Valley. So that's my shameless pitch. With that, I will be happy to stop and answer any questions. What do you think, Danielle? Do you have any questions?
Larry, it's Noelle Resnick. How are you?
Hi.
I can't get my video back on. I've been having a lot of trouble with my laptop today. But one of the things
for you that you can't get a picture of.
Yeah, I know, terribly ironic. But I'd rather be taking in all the contact and participating than worrying about how to fix that right now. In any event, I think something that's really important to us regarding local news is when people write letters to the editor that can be somewhat toxic. What is the responsibility, or how is it best handled in situations? Because it can, in a small community in particular, it can really affect people's perception of what's happening. And I know we recently had something like that come up, and I thought it was handled brilliantly in terms of response. It was just the facts. I mean, I know how I felt when I read it, and I know how many people felt when they read the letter to the editor. But the way it was managed was absolutely, it was just, I felt it was perfect. It was just the facts. It was not inflammatory. It stated what was reality and what was not. And I just thought that was an excellent way to manage it. But yet again, what is the thought about things like that? We've had that happen on occasion to the Sun, and because there is no censorship of news, these what I consider very toxic letters at times creep in. Right. What are your thoughts on all that?
Well, so I am, I defer to the people who actually know journalism. I'm more involved on the business side of trying to get our little organization going. But I think what, an editor, Kim Beltran, who's our editor here in Yountville, very experienced journalist, is going to take into account is, one, that letters column is there to engage people. It's there for people to express their points of view, and sometimes points of view are not very popular. More often than not, people are not going to write you to say, hey, I love you, what a great job you're doing, right? They're going to write because they've got a beef with something, or they have a point of view that they don't feel is being expressed. But I think, in a community like ours, where it is small and where we do, I think, strive to be civil, you've got to be careful about the kind of stuff you print if it's just truly insulting and inflammatory. If it doesn't serve, if I write a letter that says, here's why I don't like Noel Resnick, and here's all the 10 reasons, is that publishable? Is that serving a community purpose, or is that just, a beef that I'm having with you? I think those are the issues that skilled journalists like Kim and her colleagues kind of weigh out when they run them. But one thing I've said to people more than a few times in the last few months is, we're not here to publish everything that everybody likes. We're not here to publish everything that everybody hates. We're here to keep people engaged and have that paper be like a mirror that we're holding up to the community, so that we're accurately reflecting what's going on. And sometimes discord is indeed what's going on.
Well, I want to personally thank you for putting, and the Chamber, of course, for putting this webinar on. I think it's really important for all of us since we're so media oriented in everything we do. And as I said, I know there was communication with you regarding this last unfortunate incident, and as I said, I thought it was absolutely handled beautifully. So thank you.
Well, that's why I'm glad. Thank you for saying that. That's why I'm glad we have journalists who actually know what they're doing, and leave people like me to just try and, see if we can't build a business, right? Keep it going. This is my contact, by the way. If you don't see me walking my dog through town, which is how I see many of you, here's our info, and I encourage you to call if I can be of help to you or answer any questions, or if you've got more you want to discuss, I'm happy to do it. So Danielle, what do you think? Do we have more questions, or should we let people have a few minutes of their day back?
I was just thinking, I mean, what do you have any? I'm sure this is an entire separate presentation, but with the speed and how instant things go viral on social media, do you have any kind of quick tips on how to get ahead or stay ahead of things that tend to snowball very quickly?
Yes, thank you. There are, I think the two ways to answer that question are, you got to be able to measure the impact of what kind of damage it's doing, and you have to have the capability to respond. And a lot of that capability to respond is developed in advance, right? What do they say? The one thing you don't want to do in the middle of a crisis is to start writing crisis plans. Those plans should be, if you have to deploy a bigger level social media campaign, the tasks are pretty straightforward. And fortunately, we have lots of people who know, and I've run across lots of people here in the Valley, who just are really good at social media and ramping it up when it needs to be ramped up, and being quiet when it needs to be quiet. So I would say, don't overreact. Make sure you have a way of really measuring what's happening, because sometimes some really harmful drive-by comments on certain social media channels can be very upsetting, and especially upsetting to top management. But somebody in the organization's got to be able to have some perspective on, what's this really doing? Is this gaining traction? Is it affecting our sales? Has it jumped over to mainstream media? Are our customers, call-in lines being flooded with this kind of stuff? Or is this just something that, some jerk is,
Yes, it is.
is orchestrating on social? But having those plans, and I think it comes right out of what we were talking about here, to be able to deploy them quickly when you need to, have that stuff in your hip pocket in advance. And that's always, to me, those are always dollars well spent. Those are investments. Those aren't costs. Those are investments.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a very informative and great educational presentation. Does anybody else have anything before we end this?
I want to be remembered as the guy who ended early, not who dragged it up past the deadline. I always say, leave them wanting more, not wanting less. So.
Well, perfect.
Thanks,
it doesn't
Larry.
look like there are any more questions or anything in the chat. So please feel free to reach out to Larry. And like I said, this was recorded, so we will be able to post this, and you can refer back if you need to. But thank you so much, Larry, and thank you for everybody for being here this morning. And I hope everybody has a wonderful day and enjoys this sunshine we have.
Perfect. Thank you all very much.
Right.
See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.